Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
All right, as we're recording this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast, we're still in a global pandemic regarding COVID-19. And here in the United States, there's this thing known as the emergency use authorization that has become, I guess, for lack of a better term, popular these days for things like masks and ventilators and IVDs and other types of tests and situations. You know, there's a lot of good that comes from this, from an EUA perspective, and the responsiveness of companies to deliver products and services to help address the situation. But there's some side effects to this as well. And on this episode of Global Medical Device Podcast, Erica Loring, a medical device guru at Greenlight Guru, and I chat about some of the good, the bad, the pros, the cons, the impact that EUA has been having on the medical device industry. So enjoy this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast. This is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer. And joining me today is one of our medical device gurus, Erica Loring. Erica, welcome.
Hey, Jon. Thank you. I'm excited about today's talk.
Absolutely. So folks, let me tee it up a little bit for you, and then we'll dive right in. You know, we're continue to be in an interesting time in the world with COVID-19 and pandemic and all of those sorts of things. And there was this regulatory pathway. It wasn't new, but started to emerge and become more well-known as a result of COVID-19, known as the Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA. And you know, Erica's been studying, I guess, this topic and observing and consuming information about, you know, things that are happening in this space. So I thought we would dive into this a little bit and kind of talk about some pros and cons and some of the good, maybe some of the could be better scenarios. So Erica, I guess I'll let you kind of start the conversation. There's been a huge influx of EUA applications ranging from things like ventilators to masks to IVD and lab developed tests. What kind of effect has this had in general on FDA?
Yeah. So, I mean, I could sit here and probably talk to you all day about it, because I think a little bit about my background briefly, if no one listened into, the last podcast. But I've been a regulatory professional for 10, 12 years now, 15 years industry experience with quality. But in between, my time this year, I've been doing a lot of consulting for firms for PPE, masks, IVD, things of that nature. So I actually put through a couple EUAs myself and some 510Ks for masks and so on. And so I have a little bit of experience with this new thing. These companies come to me and think I'm some expert in EUA. I don't really think there is an expert in EUA, right? Because it's new, the whole pandemic. And I mean, the EUA, like you said, isn't new, but we haven't had to experience that yet. So the FDA, I think there's 3 tiers that we're going to see effect. And we're going to see effects of this EUA at the FDA level. You're going to see the effect that it's going to reach companies and it's going to reach the consumer. And the FDA, it's government funded. We are, they have a limited amount of resources as well. And they've just been hit really hard with such a huge influx of companies, trying to get in not only their 510Ks as well, because there's money to be made, a lot of money to be made with these PPE, gowns, gloves, masks, ventilators, along with the IVDs. And the FDA is just, scrambling to fill people and move people around to allocate them into these EUA reviews and also the 510Ks that also apply to this emergency as well. So we're seeing I read somewhere the other day that they were approving one IVD test, in vitro diagnostic test for COVID a day, which is insane. It is insane.
That's crazy.
That's a lot. So, their review periods on other products are getting slowed down. And I read that they're concerned, and it's fairly validated, that the quality of their reviewing is also going down, not only with the EUAs, but the 510Ks, because their resources are so limited. And it is important to still meet their timelines that they set forward, the review periods. So the EUA is looked at, it's going to be a quicker, faster to market submission, but they still have to do their due diligence. And it's especially challenging with all the companies coming in from overseas, especially China, to get a good quality review in. So they're seeing, and I myself have done a couple EUAs, and they're meaty. There's not completely lack of information. You have to do your supporting information. You're just not doing your full 510K submission with a predicate device.
I was going to say, let's unpack some of that. So,
yeah.
There is FDA publishes their statistics every year about number of pre-submission. Oh, actually, I don't know if they report the number of pre-submission, but they do report the volume of 510Ks and PMAs and de novos, and et cetera, et cetera. And not that it's a flat line. I mean, the year over year, the volume of 510Ks and other regulatory submissions do increase. Mm-hmm. So we've got that's that trend, if you will. And then you throw in something like, EUA, and that's been, I don't know if there's even a statistic on this either, but no. I just know anecdotally, I've talked to so many people that are pursuing EUA. So this is in addition to the normal growth of 510K and other regulatory submissions. Now you're piling on additional regulatory submissions, and FDA has a relatively finite number of resources, to your point. But, it's like, if you were to prioritize or triage, do I look at this 510K for, something non-COVID related, or do I look at this EUA that's COVID related? It sort of puts the agency in a precarious situation of sorts.
Absolutely.
They have to peel people away from, some 510Ks that are not COVID related to focus on EUAs. So they have to reallocate these resources, and it's created a lot of challenges. And one other thing I'll throw in to your point about the review time. I mean, it's pretty well known that 510K is supposed to take 90 days from the point of submission to clearance with the agency. Sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth. And again, these are published statistics, and I don't remember the current average, but it's somewhere in the 120-day range, give or take.
Exactly.
So, the EUA, I don't remember when it officially went into effect with respect to COVID, but let's call it March, April-ish timeframe. And, as we're recording this, it's late October, early November-ish. So, that's less than the 120 days, if my math is correct, or right at the 120 days, give or take, depending on when these things went in, So, so the fact that these EUA applications are getting through that process very quickly, I mean, of course, on one side, you're like, well, it's serving a need, a global pandemic need. And on the other extreme, it's like, yeah, but it's happening so fast, It
is happening so fast, yeah. And, the FDA tries to put specific experienced experts on the review teams. Me as a maybe a person who's done some IVD work, they're probably not going to throw me on to an MRI machine to review. They're going to want to have people with industry experience reviewing and critiquing these applications. But I don't think that's going to be the situation right now, because they're just pulling resources in where they can. So, yeah, I think the FDA is definitely feeling the pressure and the strain, and that's going to have a trickle effect, maybe to the consumer. I think I brush on that is, they've revised this EUA guidelines a few times since I think the first revision I saw was April. So at one point they didn't accept China, and now they do accept China, but then they started testing these masks coming in and ventilators coming in, and they weren't meeting the criteria that they claimed, in the submission. And now they don't allow China again. And now the ones that do, who are already on Annex A, or is it Annex A, or is it, I think it's Annex A, which is essentially the list that of companies, manufacturers that are allowed or involved in this EUA. But so they're testing and challenging these masks as they arrive in from China. So, and, I talked about the IVD tests as well. Those are getting reviewed at record time as well. And, that has a huge variance of acceptability and sensitivity. We saw some sensitivity coming in at the very beginning, I don't know, down to 1600 sensitivity level, all the way up to 180. So, these tests are not the same, and there's hundreds of them. They're getting approved every day, one a day. So the varying level of quality could be a concern, or sensitivity for the consumers as well, just because of the speed of these reviews. So we're going to see quite the interesting ripple effect across the board.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say, what I've reviewed is, speaking of quality, it's not that one is good or bad per se. It's really an unknown,
Right.
And nobody knows for sure. And one of the things I do appreciate about the traditional regulatory submission processes is the rigor that's expected and required.
Right.
And EUA seems to remove some of that rigor. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you do have to perform your testing. So I did a couple EUAs for masks, and you do have to do all the testing that's required: biocompatibility testing, your fluid resistance, all that, filtering. But I don't think it's going to be nearly as challenged as a 510K, and you're not sitting here and comparing, contrasting to a predicate. I think I have a couple of clients actually with Greenlight Guru who are putting ventilators and masks through, and they're a little bit unique, and they don't know quite where they fit in what pocket. So it's definitely a new situation, and they're going to go through an EUA as well.
Yeah.
You don't have to fit in a pocket. You can be kind of a little bit of a de novo, maybe not traditional de novo, but people are making their own little pathways.
Well, to your point, with the EUA, the notion of a predicate is not a firm and fast criteria requirement.
Nope,
right?
Yeah, correct. You have to fit on the product codes, or you have to fit in the product codes that are allowed or involved in the EUA. Like I said, we have a couple of mask companies that are very creative, and I have no doubt of their quality, the ones that we're working with at Greenlight. But it's like they fit into two different categories under respirators and masks, and they're kind of just picking one and going with that. So that would be a little bit different if you're doing a 510K. You're comparing, contrasting, and all your predicates, and back and forth with the FDA. Whereas in EUA, you're just like, it's closest to this product code, and it's in the EUA. Let's just go with that. So it's interesting.
I mean, and I guess maybe to the layperson, and I'll offer this, and you can say no, you're thinking about it wrong, or yeah, that's right. But it seems like there's the risk, if you will. I mean, is it? Well, I guess even as I'm about to say it, I'm questioning, but I'll say it anyway. It seems like a risk with like a mask might be less so, or completely different profile than like an IVD test.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's tough. If you're claiming that you're KN95 or N95 and you're filtering 95% particles, right? That's pretty important. And these masks are getting sold into point of care in hospitals, surgical units, and things like that. And then, there's a huge shortage of supply a few months ago that hospitals could not get the appropriate masks that they typically go through. They have their purchasing catalog that I'm sure they just pick out of. So they were forced to kind of get creative and find masks through third parties and direct suppliers and manufacturers coming in from overseas. So in that case, it's a little bit concerning because, if they're not filtering the 95%, are they being exposed in a hospital setting
Right.
where they're constantly seeing COVID? That could be a little bit concerned. And then you have your IVDs that false positive, false negatives at this point in time. I mean, false positive isn't that scary. Of course, it'll affect our numbers and our statistics, but the false negatives would be more of the concern, right?
For sure. I mean, speak a little bit more about, compare and contrast, like an IVD test result that's either false positive and false negative. Just to give some clarification for those listening who may not be intimately familiar with the pros and cons or the risk of either scenario.
Mm-hmm. So typically a false negative is going to, we do IVD tests and you think cancer, and obviously that's going to be delayed care of getting your appropriate drugs and treatment. For COVID, a false negative, there isn't a whole lot going on with point of care. I mean, they're learning some things of antibiotics and other drugs that are helping lessen the symptoms, but you're kind of just going through it. But yeah, false negative, you're going out into the world and spreading this on to who knows how many people. False positive is, on the other hand, typically if we're talking something a little more common or serious as cancer, if you get a false positive, what kind of treatment are you going to potentially undergo, and mental stress? Obviously, you just got told you have cancer. That's pretty scary. So false positive for COVID, sometimes we hear about this. Your symptoms, you're asymptomatic. So if you're told you're false positive or positive and you feel as though you're probably asymptomatic, the worst case scenario is, okay, we're going to stay inside for 2 weeks, but it's going to affect our numbers and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I would rather get a false positive than a false negative. And those sensitivities are definitely taken into consideration when you do your applications.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. The other really interesting thing for me on this whole EUA thing is the volume of companies who have submitted EUA applications who are not and never have been a medical device company.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
That one is near and dear to my heart because I've been in IVD companies who go from research use only RUO to IVD, and that's falling under the 21 CFR 820s, and it's complying with ISO 1345, and usually it's a pretty big ramp up. You have to put together your quality management system. You have to make sure you have the appropriate resources. You're doing tech transfers, manufacturing transfers, scaling up. And that's not a quick thing, but these companies are thinking, let's throw in our EUA submission so we can get these sales. A lot of them already probably have sales kind of pending an EUA lined up. A lot of my companies I consulted for did. So they're really pushing to get this through. But what does that look like for the companies who are going essentially 0 to 60? 0 to 120. It is, a challenge of, do you have the right resources? What's your manufacturing capabilities? What's the quality going to look like when you're, pushing out millions and millions of masks or hundreds of thousands of tests? Do you have the right personnel with the right experience? Do you have enough personnel? So I had consulted for an IVD company, and they actually wanted to hire me on as their regulatory director. And going in, I realized I'm not right. I want to be a regulatory director. I would be a regulatory director, a quality director, operations director. I would be incoming and receiving. I would be QA. I would be QC. It was, these companies don't really understand the resources that are important.
Yeah. Well, and if you read the latest EUA guidance, and I don't remember, so forgive me if it's quite this explicit, but if you read it, it gives the impression that some of the 820 quality management system requirements, the regulations, some of those are lifted, or it's being allowed for companies to be a little bit more lax in that, and
Right.
that's kind of a head scratcher for me. I mean,
Yeah.
part of me gets it because it's like, okay, well, if there's truly this huge need, then obviously we need to figure out what obstacles can be removed. But at the same time, to your earlier points, it's like, well, how do we know the quality of these products and these tests, et cetera?
Right.
And that's what a quality system is intended to do, is to put the proper processes and checks and provisions in place to ensure that the product that's being manufactured and delivered to those who need it is the highest quality and the safest, most effective it can possibly be. So it's this
consistent.
Yeah, it's like this weird thing, and it's concerning in some regard, or in many regards, actually.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah, like you said, it's not required for them to have a registered medical device facility, and it's not required for them to have ISO 13485. They're encouraged to follow CGMPs, current good manufacturing practices, but there's no one checking. There's no auditors that are going to see, okay, well, yeah, your facility passes, it meets these criteria, we've done an audit. It's not. You're swearing, you're putting your little signature that you're going to follow these guidelines, but there's no way you can put a full quality management system in place. The company I had consulted for and they wanted to hire me, they didn't even know what a CAPA was. They didn't even know design controls at all. Zero at all. They didn't even know that existed. Yeah, there's definitely concerns, and they're growing, they're outgrowing what their capabilities are.
Yeah,
which is.
I mean, and sorry to cut you off there, but something. I mean, even though there may be some more lax criteria with respect to a quality management system, I've also know that there is an expectation that one should be doing proper design and development, design controls. You should have provisions in place from a CAPA perspective.
Mm-hmm.
These are not things that should be viewed as optional. So that is super alarming to know that companies that are entering into this aren't following best practices from a design control perspective, and they're not equipped or set up from a process perspective to be able to handle potential post-market challenges and quality events. That is concerning.
It is, and I don't want to sit here and say no test is trustworthy. It's definitely not the point. We have a lot of the bigger companies too, the Roche, BD, Becton Dickinson. What's the other one here in San Diego? Fisher. They're all putting, I'm guessing their products they're not cutting corners. I'm sure there's a lot on the market that's very trustworthy, that there's great quality. I think, there's just a small room for concern with the EUA and all prospects from, FDA, consumers, and these companies. But it's a trying time right now, and it's going to be interesting to see the long-term effect of this.
Yeah, for sure. Folks, let me take a brief pause and remind you that I'm talking with Erica Loring. Erica is one of the medical device gurus at Greenlight Guru. And speaking of Greenlight Guru, did you know that the medical device quality management system platform provided by Greenlight Guru is the only medical device quality management system on the market today? It's designed specifically and exclusively for the medical device industry, and our gurus like Erica and the other gurus on the Greenlight Guru team, they are part of the resources that are used to help shape and design and influence that entire platform. Erica's been in the industry for 15 years. I've been in the industry for 22 years. All of our gurus have been in the industry for a long time. And so that experience, that knowledge, that expertise is influential in shaping this product. And, as Eric and I are talking about EUA, this is a relevant, timely topic in the industry. All of us keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the world from the medical device industry perspective. And that constant knowledge, that keeping our fingers on the pulse means that the platform that we're providing to you is always up to date, state of the art, meets your needs as a medical device company. So if you're interested in learning more, how the Greenlight Guru medical device quality management system might be an asset to help your business, I would encourage you to go to www.greenlight.guru. And if you are one of these companies that's exploring or interested in pursuing EUA, we have expertise on staff for that, and we can help you ensure that you're not cutting corners with design controls and CAPAs and other quality system criteria through this platform. So go to www.greenlight.guru to learn more, and we'd be happy to have a demo and a conversation with you so that you can learn more about why this is so important to the health of your company. All right,
Absolutely.
so let's talk a little bit about, and we've hinted at a little bit, but the impact that EUA has had on non-EUA types of products. I mean, I think I read an article recently that I think it was Dr. Shuren at CDRH had made some sort of comment, and don't quote me on this, but this is my recollection. I guess you can confirm if you've read something similar, but that this has had a negative impact on other non-EUA devices that have been submitted into the queue. I mean, there's been delays that have been received from FDA, and it's pretty well publicized, at least for a long period of time. And I suspect there's still some ramifications of this too, that clinical trials in a lot of cases had been put on hold indefinitely because, a lot of hospitals were sequestering their staff, and there weren't resources available and that sort of thing. So what have you seen or heard or observed as far as impact for non-EUA products?
Sure. Yeah, I had been working on a couple products on the side of 510Ks and submissions that had nothing to do with the EUA. And the turnaround time was definitely lagging. Actually, I'm still waiting to hear. So I started at Greenlight just a few months ago, and I think the week before I started, I submitted a 510K. And I think that's why I was like, I need like 2 weeks before I can hop on board, because I was wrapping up some 510K stuff. So yeah, that delay, I'm definitely still feeling it. I still have my client kind of ping me at least once a week if I've heard any news from the FDA. But not only that, it was really challenging to get some of the biocompatibility testing done, because there's so much biocompatibility testing. They're just getting pushed through for gowns, gloves, masks, and any other ventilator situation for not only the EUA but other 510K submissions for COVID related products. So costs went up, turnaround time, quality of how often I could hear back from these labs. There's a few good big ones, and they're at their max capacity. I think we waited 10 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
Just to get on the timeline of when we can get on test.
Wow.
So, and that's on top of a 8 to 10 week turnaround time of completion.
For sure.
So yeah, the impact is felt all around. Also, I worked for a couple companies who were doing kind of like healthcare, beauty, hand sanitizer, shampoos, things like that. I do oddly formulating on the side, and it was really hard to find bottles, pumps, caps. It was getting down to they're getting a little desperate of buying a huge bulk supply of product from, or pumps or caps from China and hoping for the best. So it's reflected all around.
So I mean, the supply chain
is hard.
I mean, I was a few months back, I was doing some work with a potential EUA product that was a ventilator, we'll just say a low-cost ventilator, and that was what we experienced. I mean, they were trying to get printed circuit boards and just different sheet metal. Sheet metal and plastic and all of everything that you can imagine that would go into a product. A lot of those suppliers, they were quoting lead times that were ridiculous, and like half a year in some cases. I was like, this is not good. And that was for an EUA thing. And I can't imagine being a company today that's because this is the thing. I mean, while the world sort of, I don't want to say stopped, but it certainly changed because of this. But at the same time, we all know that this is, we don't know when it's going to end, and we know that it will end at some point in time in the not too distant future. But if I'm a medical device company, I'm in this for the long play.
Right.
I'm not just worried about the next month or 2 months. I'm thinking about the entire life cycle of my company and the products and the portfolio that I'm building and all these sorts of things. So as best as possible, I'm trying to maintain and operate business as usual. And now all of a sudden, I can't, because
Right.
there are delays with FDA, there are delays with biocompatibility testing, there are delays for my supply chain. So this really is the downstream effects of this have been very painful, especially
Yeah.
for a lot of small businesses, which in the medical device industry, this is a fact that few people realize. Something like 80% of medical device companies have 50 or fewer employees. So
Hmm.
those 50 or fewer employee companies are feeling this in a big, big way.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're seeing a butterfly effect, and it's reaching all corners of medical device community and people in general. So yeah, it's been interesting to be in the thick of this, and being involved.
All right. I guess to kind of wrap up the conversation today, I mean, we've talked about some of the challenges or the concerns, if you will, from an EUA perspective. We've talked a little bit about the impact on non-EUA medical devices. I guess get your crystal ball out, if you will. But what happens after we get through this pandemic and the EUA condition is lifted from the agency? What happens to all these products that are on the market
Yeah.
that got EUA? What happens next with them?
I mean, it's expected that once the EUA is lifted, they are going to remove those. These companies will have to remove their product from market if they didn't continue forward with the 510K. So that's going to have a huge effect on companies as well. Are they going to downsize? Are they going to remove their product from market? Is there going to be a grace period where they can submit 510Ks to keep them on market? All my clients that I'd worked with in between Greenlight, I strongly suggested that they continue on with a 510K just because you already did all the testing for an EUA. You have to go through you have to include biocompatibility as well. And I think a lot of companies aren't used to that, but might as well just go through with a 510K if you've already done most of the work. But yeah, I think we're going to see an interesting effect. The IVD company I referred to that I did some consulting work for, they put all their eggs in one basket, in the COVID basket. They're thinking they're in it for, the next X amount of years, and they're just going to rely on COVID tests. But they're, one of 200 probably COVID tests at this point. So who knows how this is going to disrupt the market once it's lifted.
So what advice would you give a company that decided to enter the med device space that wasn't a medical device company, who successfully obtained an EUA for their mask or their ventilator or their IVD? What advice would you give them? What should they be doing now? Because I think we all know that there is going to be a finite period of time where EUA is allowed, and to what we've talked about. At some point in time, I don't know if it's not going to be tomorrow in all likelihood, but it will be soon, where that is lifted and it's not a thing anymore. What advice would you give this EUA company that may be in that scenario?
Man. Yeah, that's a great question. You'll hear me talk about this up and down and continuously, is resources. Find yourself an experienced quality and or regulatory person to help you develop a quality management system, to help you submit these submissions, whether it's a 510K or the EUA right up front. But you can't undervalue experienced industry experience. Yeah, just find yourself the right resources, and again, quality and regulatory people have a lot on their plate. More than likely, you're going to need more than one of those experienced people. But yeah, resources is going to be a huge thing. and invest in understanding what a quality management system is and all the things that come with it. Design controls, risk analysis, CAPAs, management reviews. Those are all put in place for very good reasons. And it's not just to check the boxes. I promise you, your company will do better if you fully invest from the top down in the quality management and resources.
That's great advice. And to wrap this up, one of the things that I would like to throw out and offer is less to the medical device company or the EUA company, but more to the consumer, the patient, the human in the United States. And maybe this sounds a little too skeptical, but when my eyes became open to the medical device industry many years ago, I would find myself in a hospital or a doctor's office and like fascinated by everything that's on the wall or on the counter. Oh, that's a medical device. I wonder who makes that. And look, that's a product that I was involved with. So, sometimes, I would even like after that visit or whatever, I would go and do my own research. Is this a good product? Is this a bad product? So I tried to inform myself as a patient. And then, as my family members and friends, they've had different procedures. I would say, hey, do you know what product they're using? And what about this? And what about that? And I realize that I might be a little weird there, but I would encourage, the consumer, everyday average person to do a little bit of homework. If you're going to go get this test, try to find out more about it, the integrity of it, the information about it. A lot of this information is in the public domain. So do your homework, because, you won't have confidence that this product or this test or whatever the case may be is of the highest integrity possible. So that's my words of wisdom for, citizens in this country and frankly, the world to consider. Erica, thank you so much. This is, to your point, we could probably talk for the rest of the day on this. And
absolutely.
And I guess we'll continue to keep our finger on the pulse and see how this situation unfolds over the coming weeks and months. And maybe we'll follow up on this in a future session. But folks, thank you so much for listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast, the number one podcast in the medical device industry. Continue to spread the word, share this with your friends and colleagues, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to this and the insights of some of our medical device gurus, Erica Loring, Jon Speer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.